My name's Becca Martin, and our goal for tonight is that we really want you to have a successful start in growing small fruits in your own backyards. It can be awfully confusing sometimes when you step into a nursery and you're not sure what you're looking for, and then you bring it home and you're then even more confused as to where actually to place that fruit in your backyard. So we want to strip away some of that confusion and build some confidence. So at the end of tonight, we would hope that you walk away with knowing why you would want to grow some of these fruits, which ones in particular are really well suited for Western Washington, how to select and prepare the right site in your garden area that's going to be the right space, soil type, and sunlight for that crop. And knowing that before you even go to the store to purchase your fruits would be, the best practice. Also, which cultivars to look for at the nursery or if you're ordering online. And then also, lastly, how to properly plant, train, and then maintain those chosen fruits. So we'll be covering all of those for each of our individual fruits tonight. So first, we're going to start with a rather simple fruit. So if you're a novice gardener and you would like to just get your feet wet with growing small fruits, strawberries is what I would recommend. They take up very little space, so even if you're growing on a back patio or some other small area in containers, strawberries would work really well. They are a herbaceous perennial made up of leaves, a crown, and a root system. And as perennial, that means that they'll come back every year and the plants will produce good crops for you for about 4 to 5 years before you would need to replenish with new plants. If you've ever bought strawberries at a farmer's market or somewhere where they were just picked that morning and then you were able to eat them that afternoon, you would know that growing strawberries at home will provide you a superior quality over what you would maybe get at the grocery store. So that would be a great reason to grow them. They also are fantastic as a crop that can be eaten fresh, frozen, or if you're a canner, they make a good fruit for preserving. What's important to know before you even buy a strawberry plant is where you're going to be growing those strawberries in your garden so that you can prepare the site ahead of time. So depending on the cultivar or the variety that you're planning to purchase, you can grow strawberries in the ground, you can grow them in raised beds, or you can grow them in containers. And we'll talk about which cultivars are better for which growing area. Plants can also be purchased as what are called bare root bundles or as starts. So if you want to grow many strawberries, I would recommend purchasing bare root bundles. And that's what you see in the top picture here. They're dormant, so that means there's not going to be any leaves on them at the time that you purchase them, but they're an inexpensive way to get a lot of plants. You're going to maybe spend $15 on a bundle of about 25 plants. And another option, though, would be to buy starts, like you would find at any garden center. So if you have a smaller area or you want to have multiple varieties of strawberries, then you might want to choose to start with starts. And as far as space goes, depending on your variety of strawberry, you can grow 1 plant per square foot up to 5 strawberry plants per square foot. So we'll look at that here in a couple slides. Which one needs more space and which one can pack it in a little tighter. All strawberries, regardless of cultivar, needs a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight. You're asking it to produce food for you, and it needs sunlight in order to take and allow that process to happen and to be successful and be bountiful for you. So minimum of 6 hours of sunlight. Good air circulation is really important. Well-tilled soil. They have pretty shallow root system. Most of their roots are in that top 6 inches of the soil. So make sure that that top layer of soil is something that will be easy for the roots to grow in and has good drainage. You don't want the roots to rot because when it rains heavy, if your soil can't drain well, you're going to end up with some roots that could possibly be rotting. Also looking for a pH of 6.0 to 6.5. And one last thing to think about when you're choosing a site for planting strawberries if you're growing in the ground or maybe an existing raised bed, make sure that you're not planting in an area that's previously grown any plants from the nightshade family. That would be tomatoes, for example, or eggplants. And then also, if you've removed lawn and then you're going to be planting something, your strawberries in that area, don't plant your strawberries in that area where lawn used to be. It's just too much competition with different pests that are in the soil where lawns have been for those young strawberries to get started. And then also with the nightshade families, there are different issues that they can bring with them and leave in the soil, and then that can then affect those strawberry plants. But if you're starting with fresh soil or in a garden bed that's grown pretty much anything else, you're totally fine. So here's where we're going to talk about just two main types of strawberries, and it's important to know what you're growing and the difference, so that one, it helps you choose to which ones you're going to want because they produce fruit at different times of the summer, and then also their maintenance is different and their planting space is different. So if you've ever gone strawberry picking, and here in Clark County, there's a lot of strawberry farms that you can pick at, or over across the river in the Portland area, if you've picked strawberries, more than likely what you've picked has been a June-bearing strawberry. June bearers are the most productive of strawberry plants. They have one main crop that is either will be ready to pick in late May to early June. They also produce a lot of runners, or what are called daughter plants. So when you start with one plant, they're going to be sending out shoots or little daughter plants to replicate themselves. They form their flower buds in the fall and then bear a heavy crop the following spring. So those beds need to have special attention in the fall, but they need to be renovated, and we'll talk about what that looks like as well. So if you want one large bumper crop all at once within a short window of time in the summer, June-bearing strawberries would be your best choice. They're fantastic if you're looking to can or freeze your strawberries. Some recommended cultivars for our area would be Shooksons, or Tillamook's, Puget Crimson, Benton's, and Hoods, and those are all really commonly found at our area garden centers. So you shouldn't have any issues finding those cultivars. Day neutrals would be the other commonly found types of strawberries. And the difference between a day neutral from a June bearing is that day neutrals bear a continuous crop of strawberries from spring, late spring, all the way through until the first frost in October. So you're able to go out every couple days and pick strawberries all summer long. So it's a huge difference between the June bearing, where you just have one large crop in the late spring, early summer. So the overall yield per plant is smaller than June bearing, but you're getting strawberries all year. So you can kind of decide which is going to be better for you. Day neutrals do not send out as many runners as the June bearing ones do. There are very few runners per plant. And they're a really fantastic choice for you if you're looking to grow in containers. So even if you just have one, pot and you want to have a couple strawberry plants in it, a day neutral strawberry plant would be your best choice. The recommended cultivars for our area are TriStar, Tribute, Seascape, and Albion. And I would note also that sometimes you're going to see varieties called Fort Laramie, or there's other ones as well. Those are called ever-bearing strawberries. Those are an older variety or cultivar of strawberries that are similar to day neutral. And the difference between an ever-bearing and a day neutral is that an ever-bearing has essentially two crops. They're going to have a late spring crop, and then they won't produce through the summer, and then they will have another secondary crop in the late summer, early fall. And those types of ever-bearing strawberries are starting to fall out of favor as more people choose to grow day neutrals, because you have that consistent crop throughout the summer. But I wanted to also note that I have noticed that some nurseries will label a day neutral variety as an everbearing because they have similar growth habits in that they're not like that June bearing one crop. But there are differences in their fruit production, but there's not any difference in their plant spacing or in their maintenance. So just so you know, but if you're looking for specific cultivars like a seascape or an Albion, you'll know you're growing a day neutral. So just kind of pay attention to the names on the tags. Regardless of what type of strawberry you're planting, whether it's a June bearing or a day neutral, they're planted exactly the same. If you've purchased starts, it's pretty simple. You dig a hole that's the same size as the pot that the start is currently in, and then you place the plant into the ground, and you want to make sure that the crown of the strawberry plant stays at the same level that it is in the plant. If you end up planting it too deep or too high, that can cause some issues for the plant and stress it out. So can't get any simpler than that. Just make sure it's at the same level, same size hole as the pot that you've purchased in. If you have a bare root bundle that you purchased, there's a couple more steps for you to follow. One is when you're out planting, make sure to keep the roots moist while you're planting. You don't want them to start drying out, especially if it's a warm, sunny day or a windy day. So keep them covered maybe with a damp paper towel so that the roots don't dry out. Also, you want to trim the roots to 6 inches. So if there's some longer roots that are kind of hanging down, go ahead and take a pair of scissors and trim to 6 inches. And then you want to dig a hole large enough to accommodate the roots so that they can go straight down. Don't allow for any curving of the roots. And set the plant so that the crown is right at the midpoint of the soil level, like you see in the center of the picture here. If you plant either type, a start or a bare root, if you plant it too deep into the crown or the crown too deep into the soil, you can have some crown rot issues. And then if you plant it too high, what will happen in the winter as the ground freezes is it kind of forces the strawberry plant further out of the soil. And again, that's going to cause some stress issues for the plant. So here's again where a difference between June bearing and day neutrals come in. If you remember earlier, I said that June bearing plants send out a lot of daughter plants. So you need only a few June bearing plants to start a strawberry patch. You're also going to want to make sure that you're growing June bearing either in the ground or in a raised bed. Because they send out so many runners, they're not a good selection for a container. So you put them in the ground and you're going to allow plenty of space for them to grow. At the farm in our demonstration garden, we have a raised garden bed that is 4 feet by 5 feet. And we just restarted with our June bearing plants and we put 6 plants into that bed. And by the end of the summer, it will be chock full with 5 plants per square foot. So you do not need many June bearing plants to get a good strawberry patch going. It's also important to remember that after you've planted your strawberries, June bearing ones in particular, you will remove the blossoms for the entire first season. So if you've planted, it's April, you put in your June bearing plants, and then in June or July or August, you see some flowers forming, you'll want to remove those that first season. You want that plant to focus on establishing a good rooting system and send out its daughter plants so that it will fill up whatever space you've allotted for it. So that's its primary purpose, year 1. And then if you see that there are more than 5 runners per square foot, then you can go ahead and start clipping those runners off with a pair of scissors. Or if you see a runner on a runner, so if you had the mother plant and then it sent off a daughter plant and then that daughter plant sent off another runner, clip off that second one. That's pulling too much energy and the plant's fully capable of reproducing itself just on daughter plants. So you'll just have to pay attention to each of those plants and make sure that you keep a close eye on them because they're vigorous growers. It's amazing how quickly they'll fill in an area. For your day neutrals, or if you're also choosing to grow the everbearing varieties, they're spaced differently because they don't send out runners. they do get to be good size, as you can see this photo, but you, instead of spacing them, a couple feet apart, you're only going to plant one plant every 12 to 15 inches. And so you see here in this raised bed, a picture of our day neutral bed from the Heritage Farm. So there's one plant every 12 inches. And if any of those plants send off any runners, go ahead and clip them off. The photo at the bottom here shows the roots just starting on a runner. And that's at the point when you want to clip them off with a pair of scissors. And you'll take them off throughout the whole season. If you want to try and clip those runners when the roots have started, but before the daughter plant has actually rooted into the ground, it's just better for the plant if you get them early. I also would add that on day neutrals and on everbearing strawberry plants, you will get a small crop the first season, because when you plant, the first 6 weeks, you will remove any blossoms off of the plant. But then after that, you can allow any of the blossoms that start to stay and become strawberries for you. So you will have a small crop the first year you plant. With the June bearing plants, if you planted those this next week or something, say you planted, you won't have any strawberries for 2021. You would have a crop of strawberries on your June bearing plants for spring of 2022. So, and again, just a reminder, day neutrals are a great choice for container plants. So care and maintenance for strawberries, it's pretty simple. You do want to mulch under the plants, either by using hay or straw or black plastic. It just helps keep the weeds down. It helps the soil retain moisture. Those kinds of, it's very helpful to your plants. When you do plant, you will want to fertilize at 2, 6, and 10 weeks, and you'll fertilize with just a small amount of a nitrogen fertilizer. And then in subsequent years, you'll fertilize as needed. So if the strawberry plants are looking really healthy, I would say that your soil is healthy and that there really isn't any need to add anything else. If your strawberry plants are looking, maybe the leaves are turning yellow or something like that, then you would consider adding fertilizer at that point. All strawberry plants need 1 to 2 inches of water each week to help them produce really good fruit for you. I would recommend hand pulling weeds if you're growing in a smaller area. As I mentioned earlier, their roots are so close to the surface that if you try to till or do anything like that to remove weeds, you could damage the roots of the strawberry plants themselves. And there isn't a chemical that an herbicide that you can use around strawberries because it's a food producing crop. So here's another difference between our day neutrals and our June bearing. After a June bearing plant after you've harvested all the berries, you're going to want to mow the plant, or if you're growing in a raised bed, you'll use scissors to clip it manually, but 2 to 3 inches above the crown of the plant. And so that's what you see in this picture here. This is someone who's gone into a raised bed area and they're clipping off all of the leaves of the plants, and you'll do this for all of your June bearing plants each year. You can also take this time to clean out any crowded plants, any damaged plants, any plants that are showing signs of disease. Go ahead and take all of those out, and then add, after the first frost, add a light layer of straw if you would like to the beds. And I would add that the day neutrals, you don't need to do the mowing. You'll just leave them. You can clean out any diseased looking plants, but you don't need to clip them off. So to wrap up on strawberries, I think this is what I would want you to walk away with, knowing that the difference between June bearing and day neutral, because it's important, there's a difference in when they produce their fruit. There's a difference in how closely you can plant them in your garden. And there's a difference in how you maintain them through the growing season. So remember that June bearing is one main crop. The name has the word June in it. So if you can just remember, okay, June is usually when I'll be picking them. Maybe they might be a cultivar that produces in May or something, but more often than not, it's in June. They're best grown in the ground. They're going to have many runners, and most of those can be left. We want, remember, 5 per square foot. When we plant them, we will remove all blossoms. I know it's hard to do. I know you want strawberries, but I guarantee it will provide a stronger plant if you remove all blossoms that first planting year. And then remember that you need to mow your plants at the end of the season. The difference with our day neutrals is that you have that continuous crop spring through fall. They're a great choice for containers because they don't have as many runners. And what runners they do have, you actually want to remove. And then when you do plant them, the first 6 weeks, you'll take off any blossoms. And after that, you can leave the blossoms on and allow the plant to set fruit. And these plants do not get mowed. So that is strawberries. And then I'll wrap up tonight, my section with raspberries and blackberries. So caneberries, your raspberries and blackberries are all species of the genus Rubus. But to tell them apart, because there are varieties of colors and they can look quite similar, a raspberry, the fruit receptacle, the core remains on the plant when you pick it, and a blackberry takes it with it. So if you look in this photo, those are red raspberries, and you'll see at the bottom of the photo, it did not have the fruit receptacle and it's empty in the center. And then the blackberries would have the fruit receptacle still in the fruit. If you have a small growing space, blackberries and raspberries are a really good choice if you want some fruit in your backyard. There's very little maintenance for blackberries and raspberries. And really, they're such a fragile fruit that the quality and what you can grow in your own backyards is far superior over what can be purchased in the store. And then you get more choice too. There are so many options out there when choosing blackberries and raspberries. So let's look at raspberries first. So a raspberry plant has 2 parts. It has the crown of the plant, which is perennial, and then it has the canes, which are biennial, meaning they'll be on the plant for 2 years. All raspberries are self-fruiting, so they do not need another raspberry plant to pollinate. And most raspberries produce what are called primocanes the first year, and that means it's a leafy cane of the raspberry. And the second year, that primocane then is called a floricane, and that second year is when it will fruit. However, there's an exception to every rule, and so we'll talk about some of the raspberries that break that rule. The most commonly grown type of raspberry in our area is the summer bearing cultivars, and those are the ones that you're picking, June or July. But there are also fall or ever bearing cultivars that are sometimes also called primo cane fruiting raspberries. So those are the 2 different types, but summer bearing tends to be the most common. As far as raspberries go, there are cultivars of black raspberries. Sometimes we call them black caps. There are purple raspberries, which are a hybrid, and then there are yellow raspberries, which are a mutant of a red raspberry. So there are many choices. Some recommended cultivars for our area are for summer bearing would be Cascade Bounty, Cascade Delight, and Chimanus. And for the fall or ever-bearing varieties, Caroline, Polka, and Heritage. So you're going to need to choose your site before you go plant shopping, because you'll need to know how much space you have to grow these beautiful berries. So choose a site that has full sun. Raspberries can tolerate some shade, but they really do best with full sun. And by full sun, again, we're talking that 6, 8 or more hours of sun a day. And I cannot stress this enough, raspberries must have good drainage. If you have an area of your lawn that gets 8 or more hours of sun, but it's a soggy mess, that's not going to be the best choice for raspberries to grow in the ground. There are workarounds. You can create some raised beds. You can install some drain tiles at a depth of 25 inches. But that top 2 feet of your soil really needs to be well draining if you're going to grow raspberries. There's a lot of root rot issues that can happen if your soil's not draining. Also think about where you're growing them and if that site will work 15 years from now, because that's how long you'll have these raspberries growing. So think long-term when you choose a site. They prefer soil of 5.5 to 6.5. And also think about how long your row will be, knowing that you're going to be planting your raspberry plants every 2 to 2.5 feet. So if you think, okay, I've got 12 feet and I need one plant every 2 to 2.5 feet. So kind of think along those lines as you choose a site. And then always start with disease-free plants as bare roots or starts. Your neighbor might have a great little patch of raspberries, but it really is best to start fresh with disease-free plants from a certified grower or nursery. And lastly, most raspberries need to be trellised. And so think about what type of trellising system you're going to install and make plans to have that installed. You don't have to do it the same day that you plant your raspberry starts, but it will have to be done that same, time period when you're planting your raspberries. So we'll plant them early in the season, and you're going to dig a hole. It's much similar to your strawberries. Dig a hole that can accommodate the roots, and you'll space the plants 2 to 2.5 feet apart within the row. And raspberries are grown either in hedgerow or hill systems. A hedgerow is much like it sounds. It's a long row of raspberry plants that ends up looking like a hedge. The hill system is growing them to where those raspberry cane crowns clump into, so that as the canes come up, they're continually just growing around one crown. Red raspberries for the hedgerow system are spaced 2 feet apart, and you keep your rows at about 12 inches wide. And the hedgerow system is great for either the summer bearing or your ever bearing raspberries. But if you're going to do a hill system with the canes that are clustering around a single plant, that's really best just for your summer bearing raspberries. And you'll want to space those plants 2.5 feet apart. If you're planting bare root raspberries, when you're planting them, go ahead and cut the canes to 6 inches and then let it grow from there. And then in your planting year, you also, again, want to apply nitrogen across 3 separate applications. That's 1/2 to 1 ounce of nitrogen per plant, and you're going to break that up over applying, every couple of weeks. So don't put that all on at one time. I should say as well that a good options for nitrogen fertilizers would be a feather meal or a blood meal, urea or fish fertilizer. Look at the first number on whatever fertilizer you're looking at, and that's your nitrogen. And you want a fertilizer that's mostly just that. You really don't need to add the other things. So that feather meal and blood meal will do that for you. You'll water 1 inch per week. That's pretty common. Watering recommendation for most fruits and vegetables is 1 inch per week. And then as far as pruning goes, your summer bearing ones are pretty simple. In the fall, you remove all of your flora canes. And remember, flora means fruit. That's how I remember it. So they are the ones that produced fruit that summer. And so those are the ones I will remove in the fall. They often start to look brown, maybe a little dried out. And the primocanes, which were the shoots that came up and produced the leafy greens, those look nice and fresh still. So they're easy to tell apart when you're out there in the fall pruning them away, but you'll just cut them to the ground in the fall and then leave your primocanes. And then you'll come back in the winter and you'll tip your primocanes to about 6 feet. So that's summer bearing. For fall bearing, you can remove your floricanes after the summer crop. And then when in your dormant season, again, the winter, you can remove any weak canes and you can narrow your hedgerow. All right, our last fruit for me would be blackberries. They have a very similar growth habit as raspberries, but there are, in that they have primocanes and floricanes, but there's 3 different types in how, and one is trailing, one is erect, and one is semi-erect. And each of those have a different trellising system needed that we'll look at here in a little bit. And I know maybe if you've grown up in the area, you've seen all the blackberries that grow along the roadsides and you think, oh my goodness, I don't want to grow fruit that's going to take over my whole backyard. Well, the blackberries that we're going to recommend are not the invasive Himalayan blackberries. These are ones that are grown to that are for our area. They're grown and they'll stay in the spot that you put them in if you give them, their allotted space. And what's nice too is there are many thornless varieties. So if you've ever spent an August trying to pick blackberries off the side of the road and you come out and your arms are all scratched up, you can find a lot of varieties of blackberries that are thornless, and it makes picking a lot easier. So some recommended cultivars for our area are obsidian, and they are a trailing thorny variety. Triple crown, which are semi-erect and thornless, and they are huge. They'll produce berries that are about as big as your thumb. It's pretty impressive. There's Columbia Star, which is a trailing thornless variety, and Black Diamond is another trailing thornless variety. Before you buy your plants, think about where you want to put them, and start with any certified disease-free bare root starts or plants. Choose, again, full sun. That's a common theme here. Anything that's producing food often needs quite a bit of sun to do it. Again, though, they can tolerate some shade. Blackberries, so if you wanted to grow raspberries but you couldn't find a site that was well draining, then blackberries will be your better choice. They can withstand some heavy soils. They still want good drainage, but they can tolerate a little bit more wetness. And think long-term again, choose a location where they will be happy and you won't have to move them or do anything to them for 15 to 20 years. If you're thinking ahead like this year and you want to plant next year, then this summer or fall, you can apply an organic matter to the area that you plan on planting your blackberries and they will be happier for it. So if you have some compost or aged manure or anything like that that you want to put in the area where you plan to plant, you can think maybe a year ahead and do that. So when you're planting blackberries, you're going to have to know what variety you're planting or which cultivar that you're planting because they have different spacing requirements. Some are more vigorous growers than other. So your trailing cultivars, so some of those that we had recommended a couple slides back were trailing ones. You'll need 4 to 6 feet between each plant. And on any of these, whenever it says 4 to 6 or 2 to 3, I always go the furthest apart because here in the Northwest, I feel like everything grows to the maximum. So I would plant them 6 feet apart. If you've chosen an erect cultivar, they need to be 2 to 3 feet apart, and semi-erect, like those triple crowns that I mentioned, those you're planting 5 to 6 feet apart. And take a tape measure out. Don't just eyeball it. Take a tape measure and make sure you're actually giving them the space they need. Don't crowd out your plants. You'll regret it down the road when you're having difficulty harvesting or you're noticing some issues with diseases because they're too close together. Plant early in the year when you can work the soil. So now is a good time. And again, same as raspberries, if you're planting bare root, cut the cane to 6 inches at planting time, and similar application of fertilizers at planting time. So 1/2 to 1 ounce of nitrogen per plant over 3 applications. You would do one 2 weeks after planting, 1 month following that, and another month following that. And then also plan and install your trellis system based on the blackberry type. So I've got a picture here of the 3 main types of trellising systems. And what you'll notice on the first one, the double T works for those semi-erect blackberries, which are pretty vigorous growers, but you can also use that for raspberries. So if you want to grow raspberries and blackberries, then I would choose a semi-erect like the triple crown, and then have your summer-bearing raspberries, and you can have one long row and use the same trellising system. So it makes your life a little simpler. But then you can also, if you're choosing just the erect blackberries, a simple T trellis will work. They don't need as much support because, as their name implies, they're stronger. They're also not as vigorous of a grower. And then the trailing blackberries require a 2-wire trellis. The new growth for the year will go along the ground, and then Then you're going to pull it up to the trellis when it becomes the floricanes, and then the new primocanes will grow along the ground. So that's why you have this different system. The ones along the ground are the primocanes, the ones on the trellis are the floricanes. So those ones require a little more work when you're growing those. Care and maintenance, again, if it looks like it needs, if your plants look like it needs some fertilizer, go ahead and apply nitrogen in subsequent years. When the primocanes, so you would do it again over 3 applications. When the primocanes begin to grow, primocanes are new leafy canes, then you can again do your second application at the end of May and then at the end of June. You want to remove any weeds from the area and use mulch to suppress the weeds and help water retention. You don't want to have your blackberries or your raspberries have to compete for space with the weeds. Then you're going to prune and train based on the plant that you're growing. So whether it's erect, semi-erect, or trailing, and make sure to, again, irrigate that 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week from mid-June through late summer. So have a plan for how you're going to water your plants. And if you're saying, well, I don't have 12 feet of a sunny, well-draining spot, there are raspberries and blackberries that can be grown in containers. And I had one that was growing for a few years. It did really well. I was very happy with it. So if you look in your garden centers, you can find dwarf erect varieties of raspberries and blackberries that are, bred to be grown in large containers. So don't think that just because you don't have a large space in your backyard that you can't grow these on your own. There are options out there for you. So before I leave you tonight, I'm going to make sure we do a little wrap up on our caneberries. Remember that blackberries can tolerate heavier soils, but raspberries must have good drainage. Both raspberries and blackberries need to be trellised based on their growth habits. So know what cultivar you're buying so that you could do the research to know what type of trellis it needs and what type of pruning it needs. Remember that both of these berries, blackberries and raspberries, produce a primocanes the first year, those leafy ones. And then once the calendar year rolls over, that primocane is now called a floricane, and that's what will fruit for you the next year. And just to remember your variety, put it in a gardening journal or put a tag in your row so that you know whether you're growing summer bearing or fall bearing raspberries, because that affects how you prune them and when you harvest them. So that's all I have for you on strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries, and I'm going to pass it along to John. Thank you very much.
So good evening. Thank you, Becca. Again, my name is John Moore. I'm an avid blueberry grower in my home garden, and I'm part of a team that is renovating an abandoned blueberry field at Heritage Farm. We're 3 years into that, and so I can truly say that I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly of the life cycle of a blueberry. So what I'm here to do tonight is just give you a quick overview, hopefully give you the information you need to determine whether you want to grow blueberries at all, and if you do, what you need to know before you walk into the store. So I'm going to cover the same areas that Becca did. We'll be moving through this pretty quickly, and I'll be focusing on what I think you especially need to know when you walk into the garden center and choose the right variety for you. The increasing interest in blueberries from a consumer point of view has really increased research and the availability of different varieties and species of blueberries. We're starting to get some from other parts of the country, and the regional differences of them are very important. So I'll spend some time on that. But first of all, why would you want to grow a blueberry? First of all, I think blueberries have been listed on every superfood list that I've ever seen. They're also really tasty, and they're pretty expensive to buy at the supermarket. So There's three good reasons for choosing these. But that's not all. They're attractive bushes. They provide three-season interesting color, and they're really versatile because they can be used other places in your landscape as a nice complement to that. And to top it all off, they're pretty easy to grow. They're well adapted to this. Most of the species are well adapted to our area, and they'll be easy to grow just as long as you meet a few of their basic needs. So in general terms, it's a long-lived deciduous shrub. Long-lived meaning that it's not unusual for them to be productive for 50 years or even more. So it's worth your while to do some research before you make an investment in these things. They have very shallow roots with no root hairs, which means they're susceptible to damage, and they don't compete very well with grasses and weeds and that sort of thing. So you need to plan to have a clear area for them. You expect them to grow 6 or 7 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide. And like Becca said with some of her plants, go for the wide side. Most of the tags will say 2 to 3 feet between spacing. I personally recommend at least 4 feet between the plants to allow you room to get in there and move around, take care of your plants without damaging the bush. Also provides good airflow between the bushes, which is really important. So this is a diagram of the typical blueberry bush. I've showed this because I want to focus on that root system. See how shallow most of the roots are, and that they're right there where the grasses and the weeds grow too, and right there where they could be damaged when you're doing tilling around it. So it's important to plan on keeping the drip zone around the plant clear and mulch to keep them free of weeds. Like I said, there's a lot of different cultivars that are available now, and if you haven't been blueberry shopping in a while, you're going to see, you'll be surprised when you go back and see what they have now. The three main species that you'll see: the northern high bush, the southern high bush, the northern high bush, the rabbit eye, and the low bush. If you are growing fruit to eat, by far and away, the best one to choose for the Pacific Northwest is a northern high bush species. You can find lots of different cultivars that are well adapted and have different sizes and shapes of berries and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, you're not going to find all the information you need on the label. They are notoriously incomplete for information. So when you go in, do some research if you can ahead of time. And be sure to read everything on the label, and both labels if they're on there, and ask questions of knowledgeable salesperson to find out exactly what you're getting. An example would be the half-high hybrid that I have down there under northern high bush, usually labeled as a northern high bush species. However, it's a hybrid between a low bush and a high bush, and it has very different characteristics. It's only about half as high as you might expect. But it also has inferior fruit and quantity of fruit for harvest. Not bad mouthing the half highs. There is a place for them, especially if you have a small area and you're not after quality fruit. The southern high bush is another hybrid between the low bush and the northern high bush that, as the name implies, is suited for the southern climates of the United States. Unfortunately, it's very, very frost tender. The fruit is not quite up, it's not nearly up to the quality of the northern high bush, and you're not going to get very good results if you plant them here. Very good results for your fruit. However, if you're looking for a landscape plant, some of these are semi-evergreen or evergreen, and so they might be good for that. And then in a year where they don't lose all their fruit to the frost, you might get some fruit there. Then there are the rabbit eye species. They are also adapted to the southeastern United States, so they have a little trouble here. They open their blossoms early while we're still having our frost, and often lose all of their fruit. They tend to be a great big plant. So I would can't really recommend those, even though some of my colleagues are growing a variety called pink lemonade, and they're having some success with that. The low bush varieties are native to the extreme northeast of the United States, where it's really cold. They are about 18 inches high. They're very hardy, and they will grow well in the Pacific Northwest. However, their fruit is lackluster at best. So if you want something that you can put in a container or a very small space, you're not too worried about the fruit. The low bush may be for you. So to wrap all that up, if you're looking for fruit and something well adapted to the Pacific Northwest, the northern high bush, and make sure that you're getting the northern high bush variety, or excuse me, species. Any one of the cultivars and varieties, and those would be fine. Southern high bush, rabbit eye, for warmer climates, they're not going to give you good fruit, but they might give you interesting plant value, landscape value. And then the low bush is well adapted for containers. Another couple of things to keep in mind when you're choosing a cultivar. First of all, blueberries are technically self-fertile. They don't need another plant to pollinize them in order to get a harvest. However, if you have more than one cultivar of the same species, you will vastly improve the quantity and quality of the fruit. So by all means, go for one or more cultivars. Those cultivars are different types. And when I say types, they're classified as early, mid, or late. That is referring to the harvest time, not the blossom time. Most of them bloom at about the same time. The picture on the right here shows includes three different, each of the early, mid, and late cultivars, and they're all in bloom, pollinizing each other at the same time. Where it really comes in handy is your harvest strategy. If you want all of your harvest at one time, then by all means just plant all of one type. So if you're doing preserving, you might plant all earlies or all mids or all lates. But if you want to have a consistent harvest over, say, from late June to early fall, then you might want to include early, mid, and late cultivars. So you always have something to go out and pick. Like Becca said, the fruits need full sun. Blueberries, that's even more important. More sun means more and better berries. Also, they need good drainage, so raised beds are a good option. If you're growing in the ground, you're probably going to need to amend the soil to improve the drainage. Another amendment you might have to make is for acidity. The blueberries require a low pH with a 4.5 to 5.5 range, and the only way to determine that accurately enough is going to be a soil test done by a laboratory. Then you take the results and the recommendations from that laboratory, do that as early as you possibly can, because it takes many months to adjust the soil from where it is to where you need it to go. Our soils tend to be a little acidic here in the Pacific Northwest, but don't let that fool you. Most of our soils aren't down at the 4.5 level, and they will need some adjusting. Then after you get everything all amended, it's time to plant. You can plant as soon as soil can be worked in the early spring. Once you get them in the ground, they need consistent water, depending on your soil type, 1.5 to 3 inches per week throughout the whole growing season. Adding mulch will help you with the weeds and maintain a consistent moisture. And fertilizer can be a little bit tricky because it's different. Blueberry plants can only use the ammonium form of nitrogen fertilizer. So in the ingredients on your fertilizer bag, you look for the word ammonia, ammoniacal, or urea. All of these are ammoniacal forms of nitrogen. It's a good idea to take a yearly amount of your recommended applications, and divide it into 3 sections so that you can give the plant the nutrition it needs during the time frame that it needs it. So that would be from bud break through fruit production. So 3 applications, March, April, and May, work out just right. Then when the plants go dormant, you're going to need to do some pruning. Pruning is so important that we put on a whole workshop just on pruning blueberries, and I highly recommend it to you. It can seem brutal at first because you're removing 20 to 50% of the plant every year. So once you got it in the ground, it's time to get the plant established. In year 1, no matter how old the plant is that you're putting in, is the planting year. So that year, you strip off all the blossoms and you don't get any fruit. You prevent all fruit sets so that the plant can concentrate all of its strength into developing a good root system. In the second year, you still strip off most of the blossoms and don't allow much fruit set. But you can eat a few of them just to see how they're coming along. And then finally, in year 3, you only have to strip off a few of the blossoms. Then you can eat the rest of them, and you're off and running. You're selecting canes for the future structure of your plant. Like I said, the blueberries are well adapted to the Pacific Northwest, so they don't have very many problems. Weeds, of course, we've already talked about. The birds will also want to share your harvest with you. And you'll lose a good portion of your harvest if you don't have some way to deter the birds, like a good netting system. Insects and diseases, again, because it's well adapted, you don't have that many problems, and they're usually prevented or cured with common cultural practices. Those would be avoid overhead watering to keep the leaves dry, encourage good airflow with good plant spacing and adequate pruning, sanitation, removing dead and diseased and dead, damaged, and diseased stuff right away, and picking up any berries that have fallen on the ground. If you do need some kind of a preventive spray, there are organics and there are and also conventional sprays that can be used as prevention. There's nothing that can help a problem once it gets going until the next year. So be sure if you use any of those, even if they're organic, follow all the instructions on the fertilizer. And then finally, the payday. You can expect, depending on the cultivars and the growing conditions, about 10 pounds of blueberries per year per mature bush. And a mature bush is usually considered at about 6 years old. And you can pick from that particular cultivar for about 2 to 5 weeks. Once you get them into the house, don't wash them, refrigerate them right away, and they'll be good in the refrigerator for about 2 to 3 weeks or for several months if you freeze them. So the main takeaways that I hope you get tonight, first of all, if you're after blueberries to eat, we recommend northern high bush cultivars. If you're looking for other landscape value, then you can look at some of the other species. You need to get a low pH and get it down into the 4.5 to 5.5 range. And remember that takes about a year to happen. You should only use the ammonium form of nitrogen. So you're looking for urea, ammoniacal, or ammonia in the ingredients. And you're gonna have to find a way to keep the birds away, whether it's netting or predators in the area, whatever it takes, so that you have a chance to enjoy some of your tasty superfoods. That's all I have for you for the blueberries. We're going to take a short break here to answer some of your questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Erica so she can deal out the questions to the rest of us.
Yeah, so there's a couple that have come in on blueberries. And one is, what are the copper sprays used for blueberries?
They're used mostly as a preventative for funguses and bacterial problems. So if you're seeing that sort of thing in a particular year, the next spring, you might want to do a foliar spray of those things to prevent those.
Okay, and how about organic fertilizers, such as blood meal or feather meal for blueberries?
Those are good. I personally tend to lean towards organics for most things. However, I make an exception for blueberries because uh, they need the nutrition right away when they break bud. The soil temperatures when blueberries break bud here are usually 50 degrees or lower. And at that point, there's not much microbial activity going on in the soil. And so there's nothing there to break down our organic fertilizer and make them available to the plant. So I like to use ammonium sulfate because it's immediately available to the plant. It doesn't need a microbial activity to convert it so that the plant has what they need when they need it.
Okay, and another one is someone's asking about a 15-year-old Liberty blueberry bush that is available to take out and replant. Is that worth it?
Well, at 15 years, it's going to be pretty doable. And I think it would probably be worth it. Just know that there's going to be an extensive root system. And that one that's 15 years old will have done a couple of pretty significant tap roots. So you'll probably do some damage to that when you pull it out. However, we pulled out some 70-year-old ones a couple of years ago. They were just like that. We put them in, treated them like a year one plant, stripped off all the blossoms, and they're still growing and going strong. So yeah, I would say that it's worth it.
Okay, thanks, John. Becca, there were a couple of questions that came in on strawberries and raspberries. I wonder if you want to just briefly share the question and the answer, if you can pull those out under the answered piece.
Sure.
And while you're doing that, John, there is one more blueberry question. It says, if I had a blueberry plant in a pot for 5 years, would I still strip the flowers in the first year of a transplant?
I would recommend that you do because you're doing damage or disrupting the root system, and it needs to get reestablished. So I would at least do that for the first year and see how robust it comes back and see how much damage was done.
Okay, thanks, John. Becca, did you have one or two that you'd like to share?
Well, so I saw one on here, do first year strawberries, so our June bearing ones that have been deblossomed need to be mowed that first fall. And that's a really good question. It is one, when we put our demonstration garden in a couple years ago, I had to research that, and there was no publication that said, don't mow or do mow. So my assumption was, and what I did was that when we planted our June bearing strawberries in the spring and we removed all the blossoms, we did not renovate that bed or mow it the first summer. We left everything there to stay, and then we did start renovating the second year. Our plants did really well with that, but that was just a gut call that I had to make. I couldn't find something that laid that step-by-step. So that's what I would recommend, because in my mind, it's called renovating the bed, and if it's just been put in, there's nothing to renovate yet. So go ahead and leave the leaves on for that first year.
Are there any? Go ahead.
I was trying to think if there were any other questions that we had. There were questions about when you have, I said, the strawberry plant is good for 4 to 5 years, and that's the mother plant, and then it's sent daughter plants. Do those daughter plants fall into that? The recommendation is that the mother plant, the daughter plants that it has set off, those daughter plants it's best to just remove everything and start fresh with fresh plants. A couple of reasons why: fruit production will go down as the strawberry plant ages. But another issue is if the mother plant has any sort of virus or virus load, it's getting passed on to the daughter plants. So you'll have to look at your beds and you'll have to see what the fruit production looks like. It might be 4 years, it might be 5 years, it might be 6 years, but start knowing that it won't be producing as much fruit. So it's better for you to spend that, $15 on 25 brand new plants and start fresh with new June bearing strawberries or new day neutrals and get a good crop. because even though, yes, those daughter plants technically are younger than the mother plant, they're still not going to be producing as well. They're going to get crowded and have air circulation issues. So just know in your mind, every 4 to 5 years, you'll be starting over any type, whether it's stay neutrals or June bearing. You might rotate beds, have one that gets started, and then a couple of years later, start another one, so that you'll know 2 years later that first one is going to get renovated as brand new. So.
Thanks, Becca.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and move on to our next presenter.
I'm going to ask John to stop sharing so I can go ahead and share. There you go. Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart Campbell. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. And Erica, of course, for your great leadership. I'm going to share a blank screen. You're probably seeing a blue screen right now.
Yes, we are.
All right. Now I think you're seeing a presentation.
We are.
Good. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about grapes in the home garden, primarily table grapes, because that's what most people have at home, but wine grapes can be grown at home as well. That's the principles are pretty much the same for both of them. Some of the techniques for maintaining them, as you'll see in vineyards, are very different, but in the home garden, it's pretty much the same. So why, these are what I'm going to cover in the next few minutes, why you might want to grow them in the first place, for heaven's sakes. These vines are pretty intense. We're going to talk a little bit about description and terminology. We'll look at requirements for site, light, water, soil, talk about some varieties, care feeding, a little bit about disease and support and pruning. While we're on this slide, I want to tell you there are about 10,000 varieties or cultivars actually of grapes in the world today. That's a lot. 72 million tons of grapes are grown annually in the world, and 7.2 trillion gallons of wine are made each year. I think I'm responsible for some of that, drinking that is. And many online sources are out there for you. If you're looking for information on growing grapes in the home garden, I'll share one reference with you, but don't be afraid to look at universities from around the world because again, the climates are very different. The types of grapes grown are different, but the principles of how grapes grow are pretty similar around the world. So grapes are fun and rewarding vines. They've been cultivated for over 8,000 years. They're versatile, like probably the most versatile small fruit we'll be talking about, but that's in my opinion because I'm a grape guy. You can make jams, pies, juices, and wine, and you get a big crop up to 20, I was looking that up, 20 pounds per vine of on a healthy vine, depending on the variety, of course. So you get a big crop every year for decades. They're also a nice visual addition to any garden. I think John was talking about the ornamental value of some of these small fruits. Don't pass that by as you're looking to get into small fruit. This is a little arbor in my yard, and I think it's very pleasant to sit out there and watch the plants grow. They grow well in our climate, and we are changing. Our climate is changing, and so the types of grapes you can grow here are changing. You can spend some time looking that up if you're interested in how things are transitioning on our side of the mountain. They're very resilient, typically hardy, and pretty easy to grow. So the key points for this slide, for every slide, I'm going to give you a couple of key points. Growing grapes in the home garden can be fun and rewarding for many years. So just take that away with you. So how do they grow? Grapes are woody perennial vines. I think you know what that means. They come back every year, but there's parts of them that are made out, look like a tree. They're kind of woody. They do best in full sun. They accept a wide variety of soils. They have both the male and female parts on the same plant, so you don't need a male and female when you're talking about grapes. The flowers and the fruit are on what we call new shoots. I'll show you a picture of what those look like. But shoots are where the action is, okay? They're pollinated by wind and insects, and they have to be pruned and trained every year. So there is some work around grapes. If you're thinking about throwing in some vines and walking away from them, you'll have a mess to clean up in 5 years. So my recommendation is think about it before you do, and I'll show you what that involves. So our key points from this slide are the grapes are woody perennial vines, and I didn't mention this, but they go dormant every winter. So they're perennial, they go dormant, and they come back, and they'll come back, and they'll come back. Let's look at what a vine looks like and talk about terminology. First of all, I think over here now you can see my arrow. This is the trunk. Just like a tree, a vine has a trunk, and that's one of the woody parts of the vine. Okay. Canes are basically year-old wood that comes off of that woody part of the trunk. Now, cane starts out as a shoot. A shoot, see how green it is? It's just really fleshy, new growth. This is the current year's growth, your shoots. Your canes are what you use when you do cane pruning. We'll talk about that a little later. You renew those canes every year. You renew those because they will produce these shoots where you see the fruit is appearing every year. Okay. A spur is nothing more than a cane that's been pruned down to 2 to 3 buds, and a spur provides canes and shoots for the year's growth. And we'll talk a little bit about that in pruning. Cordon is the only other woody part of a vine, typically. Sometimes they're called arms if they're cut short, but basically the trunk and the cordon are wood. They're there every year. They don't do anything but grow thicker around, okay? But the canes and the shoots, typically you're doing something with them every year. You're renewing them. And then suckers and water sprouts, I think we know about those. In fruit trees, you take them out. Pretty much with grapes, you don't need them. You take them out unless you're trying to reestablish a new trunk. You can actually use one of these suckers that's down here to create a new plant, take out this old one, and that's a major renovation. So the key points from this slide: vines have woody and fleshy parts, and fruit is born on the shoots, which is the current year's growth. When you're sitting down to select varieties for your home, say you have 5 acres, say you have a ½ acre, it doesn't matter. You need to be very careful about where you put grapes. And one thing is, what are you going to do? Are these for eating in the house? Are these for making juice? Or are you going to make wine out of them? So that will feed your selection process for sure. Some people plant them for ornamental. I've got the side of a barn. I want something on the barn. Instead of clematis or something else, I'm going to plant grapes. Maybe I'll get some fruit. Maybe you will. But if they're not pruned and cared for, you won't get much fruit, but you will have a beautiful display of vegetation in no time. You want to know about your cold tolerance and where you live, your local climate. If you're up on the foothills, if you're down in a cold pocket, some of the varieties that you'll find are sensitive to those conditions, and they actually won't produce the shoots on some of the buds that are closer, the basal buds that are closer to the trunk. Okay, so read up on your vine, look at your local climate, and that's one consideration when selecting a variety. Disease resistance is another one. American varieties are more resistant to things like powdery mildew than European varieties. Another thing is early, mid, or late fruiting, I think Becca was talking about. Grapes come at different times of the year as well. And I'll show you when we're looking at varieties, a couple that come at different times. This is probably key, this last one. If you like grapes and you've been out to tasting or you bought them in the store and you say, I want that grape, I want to grow it, that's probably a good choice for you. But if you just blindly go and pick one out of the store and stick it in the ground, you may end up not liking that at all. So please take your time before you do that. simply because you're going to own that grapevine for a long time to come. So the key point, think about what you want in your yard, do your research, and do it before you go buying anything or planting anything in your yard. So when we look at varieties, what I love about this slide and some of these names is the variety. The cultivar, the cultivation of grapes has been going on for 8,000 years. They've had a lot of time to play with it. And you'll see it in these some of these varieties. And when you get into wine grapes, it's even crazier. It's fun. But when you look at the flavorings, let me go through that. Foxy flavor. What is a foxy flavor? That's exciting to me when I first heard that. What that means simply is it tastes kind of like Concord. It came from the muscadine grapes out in that grow wild in East Texas. That is a real strong foxy flavor. It's earthy, musty flavor. And then the flavors go pleasant and sweet, spicy, honey-like, strawberry-like. I mean, all of these variations are exciting to get into. So you want to know what you're growing and what flavors you like. You can see that Reliance is early. That's the E. Buffalo is mid, early to mid. So it passes that period. And then you get into your Niagara, which I'm not showing a picture of, but it's a little less sweet and it comes in a little later. So these are some of the things to consider before you ever go out and buy a plant. And if you can get out there and actually pull them off the vine and taste them, that'd be great too. So the key point, look for cultivars that you like and will do well in your area. As simple as that. Care and feeding. I can't stress planting enough. There's reasons for that, and we'll cover that in the summary, but grapevines grow to up to, my dog is going crazy, excuse me. They grow up until 50 years or more. So your decision is going to stick with you. They like full sun, north-south orientation if you're planting in rows. They'll take a wide range of pH. They don't like anything over 8. So you'll want to find, perhaps do a soil test and determine what your pH is and see if you need to adjust that. They don't compete well with weeds, especially in the first couple of years. You can put mulch or plastic down, keep it away from the trunk itself. What we're going to do up in the vineyard at the Heritage Farm is use some leaves between the plants, and then around the plants use some chips. You can add organic matter, always benefits the plant. And in the first 2 years, vines need nitrogen in the amount of 0.5 to 1 ounce the first year, and then you can go up to 1 to 1.5 ounces the second year. Again, that's to help establish the roots. I think we've been talking about that consistently today. You want to get those roots going so that in the future, this plant can put its energy on producing fruit, canes, cordons, whatever you need. I think you've heard this before too. Well-drained soils, not heavy clay. And I think with grapes, it's more important to think about frost and frost-free areas. You want a south-facing slope if you can, and you want to make sure that you've got the right variety for your particular climate. A cover crop can reduce the need for herbicides. Again, we'll talk about this. Grapes are very sensitive to herbicide drift and herbicide damage. So a key point, evaluate your site carefully, and remember that vines can take up to 50 square feet and they can live for 50 years or more. Grapes are pretty easy to propagate as well. You can start them from bare root plants. You can buy potted plants at the store, or you can get cuttings from your neighbor down the road. The cuttings are pretty easy to start. You basically cut off a cane from the previous year. You leave 3 buds, you put 2 underground, and you leave 1 above ground. Stick them in a pot, keep them watered, and you should get some rooting going on. We've been pretty successful at the vineyard with starting grapes. The one in this pot that you see right here is a 1-year-old. vine. It died back, went dormant, and now it's budding out again, and it's looking really good. So you want to leave any cuttings that you use in the pot for a full year. You can also start them in a nursery or in a piece of land, you know, anywhere in your property. I just stuffed them in behind my asparagus and had pretty good success. That's for the first year. Then you dig them out and put them where your final location is. Again, first 2 years, you're striving for healthy root growth. For spacing, American cultivars 6 to 8 feet apart, 9 to 10 feet between rows. I don't know how many of you have room for rows of grapes, but good luck to you if you do. Irrigation is needed for young plants. In fact, drip irrigation is recommended as the plants grow older too. You want a regular supply. You want your soil get moist about 6 inches down at least. But they do need water here in our area. And then again, fertilizing the first 2 years. Key point, vines are relatively easy to start. The first 2 years of root growth are the most important. Pruning is essential. There's 2 types of pruning for grapevines, cane and spur. I'm going to talk about that before I go through the rest of the bullets. Down below to the right, I'm going to get my mouse over here. Cane pruning. Remember I talked about these canes and I talked about cordons. Cordons are woody. They're part of that trunk that's allowed to continue year after year, whereas canes you replace every year. These little spurs down here are called renewal spurs, and they will allow you to grow canes that hang loose for the year and then will replace these canes the following year. So cane, for cane pruning, these canes are 1-year-old wood. Up here, the cordon can be 20 years old. They last a while. These spurs have 3 buds, 2 to 3 buds on them, and they will produce the shoots that will produce your fruit. Remember, we talked about shoots and canes. Shoots are nothing more than this year's growth, the current year's growth, that turns into a cane the following year. So you'll get it. This is a little tricky sometimes to get the anatomy of grapes down and think like a grape, but you will get it. Pruning creates the framework for the plant. Okay, with pruning and trellising, you shape it to what you need. You prune in January to March when the vine is dormant. Each cultivar has its preferred method of pruning, so be sure you read on that before you pick your variety as well. For instance, Concord, I think we decided like to be cane pruned. So I had to spur prune mine, I turned it around and went back to cane pruning. Pruning removes 80 to 90% of vine growth. I think John talked about 40%, and that made him nervous. Well, try 80 to 90%. That's a lot to come off, but grapes are very resilient. Again, fruit appears on the current year's growth, which is the shoots. So that's another point I want you to get home with. And in the summer, you can do a little pruning, but it's mostly shoot thinning. Because these buds can produce up to 3 shoots per bud, okay, every bud on a grapevine can produce up to 3 shoots. You may want to take out a couple of those shoots and leave the healthiest one so that you can get the best bunch of grapes coming out of that, okay? So you're basically removing the competition from that particular bud. And then in summer, you can pull some leaves on the western side. I'm sorry, on the eastern side. You want to get the sunlight in to the plant to help dry it out, first of all, and make sure the leaves get enough sun. On the western side, when it's hot in the summer, those leaves can help to protect the plant. So what are the key points? Through pruning and training, we shape the vine to achieve a balanced growth. And I mean balanced between your newer growth and your older growth, your fruit, the woody growth, the canes. Basically, you're balancing to encourage fruit growth. Biggest problem is the homeowners do not prune enough. Training, as I said, goes with pruning. It maximizes sunlight and ease of harvest. There are so many ways to support vines, and creativity is yours. This upper left is called Geneva double curtain. These are the arms. I'm sorry. These are the arms I talked about. They're basically cordons that have been cut short so that the canes run right down that wire. But you've got a double cane or a double wire system, so you can get a good production out of that. To the upper right is VSP, vertical shoot positioning. You'll see that a lot in commercial vineyards. It makes it really easy to get in there and harvest. It also opens it up to sunlight and airflow, and it makes maintenance a lot easier. Single downward hanging canopy on the bottom left. This is what we're doing down at the farm on some of ours. Basically, the fruit just hangs off on the shoots and you go out there and pick it when it's ready. And then you can get creative. Arbors or other structures will work too. There's a type of pruning called head training that requires no trellis at all. You just let the canes flop over and you harvest the fruit that way. It's an ancient method. It's used, I think we saw some Chardonnay plants using it. So training, it's a lot of fun. Go for it. Know this, that if you have a barn, a house, a fence, a wall, a car, the vines will continue to grow and they will grow over that structure if you're not properly pruning. They are relentless in that way. So key points, grapevines need support. You can be creative in your design and they'll take the shape of whatever is near them. 2 more slides. Ongoing care, grapevines, pests and problems. Cold injury, we've talked a lot about that. Know your plant, know your location, get something that's more resilient with cold climates if you're in a cold area. Herbicide injury, you can grow grapes without using herbicide. You get a good ground cover going, you weed under the plant, avoid using that herbicide. In the commercial side of things, it is a problem because these plants are very susceptible to chemical drift. There's an aphid-like insect that infects the roots, phylloxera, but there's really no treatment for it at this point. If it shows up in your vineyard, you're pulling plants. Mites, hornets, birds, deer, and rodents. I think we can all agree that small fruits are in battle with these guys. It's okay. With grapes, you probably do need to net them if you're growing grapes in an area where the birds tend to be a problem. I did pick some Pinot Noir out in East Texas, and those vines were netted, but the birds still got in there and got a lot of them. So did the deer. You have to decide if you want to share with nature or if you want to try and keep them out with fencing or netting. Weeds, competition, they don't do well with competition. Powdery mildew is a problem. Again, that leaf pulling in the summer, not planting your plants too close together, putting them in a north-south orientation, all of those things will help you to keep healthy sunlight into the plants and avoid some of those diseases. Proper pruning and maintenance is probably one of your best controls you have for diseases. Keep your plants healthy, and they'll live for, like I said, up to 50 years. So your key points here: a healthy vine that is in the right location and properly pruned is more resistant to diseases. So our takeaway on grapes: it's a great return on investment. 20 pounds per plant. Are you kidding me? 2 or 3 plants is all a normal household would ever need, unless you're in the business of making wine or something like that. You want to carefully plan before you buy. These are not like something you can dig up a year later and move to another place. You can transplant grapevines. It's been done, no problem. But once they get big, and you want to make sure they have enough room to grow. Let's leave it at that. They take up lots of space and they live a long time. The selection of the cultivar is very important, so take some time in doing that. Location is important, your climate and your soil, and they need to be pruned and trained. They do require annual maintenance. So if you go into grapes, remember that you're going to be visiting them a few times a year. So the key points: go for it. Have some fun. Here's a good reference. I think we'll share these. I don't know if we'll share them in a different way, but this is easy to find. OSU Extension Catalog EC 1639. This is Bernardine Strick, and it's a great starter for anybody getting into growing table grapes at home. And that's it for me.
Shall I go now, Erica?
Yes, please, Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam, and I'm going to talk about kiwis today in the Pacific Northwest. So kiwis are a native vine from Southeast Asia, but there are a few varieties that can grow in the Pacific Northwest. And kiwis are really similar, have a lot of similarities to grapes, and one of them being that they are really vigorous plants. But each female vine, that kiwi vine, can actually produce well over 100 pounds of fruit. So they need a lot of support structure. They're a dioecious plant, which means that they need to have a separate male and female plant in order to pollinate. But one male plant can pollinate up to 8 females. So they're so the kiwis to me are kind of an exotic fruit that aren't all that common in the Pacific Northwest, and it's sort of intriguing to be able to grow something that is like that. They're, to me, good tasting, high in vitamin C, and some of the varieties have a really long shelf life. There's 3 primary kiwis cultivars growing in the Pacific Northwest. There's the fuzzy kiwi, that's a picture on the left that we typically see in the grocery store. And then there's the hardy kiwi that we see on the right, that's much smaller, and it's had sort of like a grape size. And it's available just very briefly in late fall or late summer, early fall, like September, October time period. And there's also another kiwi called an Arctic Beauty, and that is typically grown for ornamental reasons. So the fuzzy kiwi is found in grocery store, and you can't eat that skin. You really, and in this area, it doesn't ripen totally on the vine, and so you pick it when it is green ripe. And then you can actually put it in your refrigerator and then pull it out as needed over the course of several months, which is the main reason why that this variety is used in the grocery store, since it's has a long shelf life. The fuzzy kiwi, though, is only hardy to about 0 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit when it's dormant. So you have to make sure it's in the right location. So Hayward is a typical variety that you can find in the grocery store. And it's the one that if you're going to kind of grow it in the Pacific Northwest, that's probably the variety you're going to pick. That harvest is going to be late October, probably maybe even in November. And the male is really just actually called fuzzy male. And that is you can find these all over the place in all kinds of nurseries. Now the hardy kiwi berry is again, it's a small grape-sized fruit, and you can eat the skin off of it. It will kind of come when they're in harvest in September, October, and you can find it. It has a short shelf life, so you don't really find it very often commercially available, but you can find it if you kind of look for it, and you get this little half pint for several dollars, because it's just kind of more fragile on the delivery. So it's kind of a prime one to grow. This one is hardy to minus 25 degrees when it's dormant. But the shelf life of the fruit is much shorter. So you're going to have to be careful about that if you get a lot of fruit. Anna is a very popular variety for the home and commercial. And so it can, again, Anna can do up to 150 pounds of vine. So it's quite hardy, quite productive. And there's a lot of other females that you can choose from. And there's also a lot of choices for males if you look in the catalogs or you go to nurseries for hardy kiwi berries as well. And you just really want to ensure that when you pick your mate, your female and your male, you just want to make sure that they're going to bloom at the same time. And some of the varieties kind of say that when you look in the catalog, will tell you you kind of need a certain male variety, so they are matching when they're going to bloom. And then another note is that a fuzzy male and a hardy female can pollinate each other and vice versa. It's just strictly a matter of making sure that the two plants bloom at the same time. Acai is kind of an interesting one for home gardeners because it's not as a vigorous vine. You're not going to get as much fruit, but then again, if you're talking 100 pounds and maybe you only get 50 pounds, that's probably a lot of kiwi still. And it is a self-fertile one. So on that one, you could get with just one kiwi and try doing that one. So this is the Arctic berry and Arctic beauty, and that is a picture of the male vine, and it's just absolutely gorgeous foliage. It needs to grow in part shade, unlike the commercially grown ones, the kiwis that want full sun. It is far less vigorous vine. The yield is much smaller. So you can find, you can find the different females to it to match with the male. But really, if you're going for fruit, this is not the best variety to pick. If you're going for really pretty and part shade, it is beautiful. So in the Pacific Northwest, cold temperatures really can be the limiting factor for growing kiwis, and males are a lot less hardy than females. And, so, but on that same token, Home Orchard Society has, Education Society, excuse me, has vines that have been planted for quite a long time. I believe maybe even in the 80s. But that would have to be verified. And they're doing really well. And there they have one fuzzy male, one fuzzy female, one hardy female, and acai. And I know of other places that have been growing them quite a long time in this area. What you have to make sure about is that the cold temperatures, is picking the right location that's sort of sheltered. So you have it kind of away from that cold north wind. And for both the hardy or the fuzzy kiwi, when they're coming out of dormancy, out of their bud break, is the time of year that they're most susceptible to having some frost damage. And when they're small, you can do like I'm doing, and you can cover them with a frost blanket. So for pH, our soils right here in the Pacific Northwest are absolutely perfect. In here, 5.5 to 6. You want to have well-drained soil, very well-drained soil. So they are prone to root rot. So if you don't have well-drained soil, then make sure you get a raised bed about a foot high, or you have some drain tiles. That's a picture of Heritage Farm where we're installing on the kiwi trellis, and you can see we're laying down cardboard to keep away for the weed control, and then we're added a layer of actually leaf mulch in order to kind of keep the cardboard down and kind of provide some kind of weed-free area. You want to have drip irrigation is best, like for most fruits. You want to apply about 2 inches of water a week during when they're young, and that you need to probably do the more frequent watering to make sure that the roots don't really dry out. And the vines, for fertilizer, they're sensitive to chloride, and you don't really want to fertilize a young vine after after July. And you need to be careful that you don't add too robust of a nitrogen, in the sense that you want to make sure that you don't burn the roots at all. So just like what, very similar to grapes, you want to have the right support structure for the home gardener. So for both the fuzzy and the hardy kiwi, because they can grow a good 20 feet a year. And so if you don't have the right structure, you make your fruit production lower, as well as you make the work a lot more on pruning it. So there's a couple approaches. There's a T-bar and a pergola. And here's an example of a vine growing up onto a T-bar trellis. And here is what you can see in my cursor. Here is the trunk, just like a grape. And from here now you make cordons. Here's one cordon following a wire. Here's another cordon with the wire. And then these are the fruitful shoots that are laying down over the wires on the T-bar. And on the right picture is our newly installed kiwi trellis that, thank you very much to John and Stuart, who made it and built it and put it in. And so what we've done is given each vine 15 feet of room, and the T's are about 5 feet apart. And then we're going to have wires going down for those fruitful shoots to lay across. And some designs kind of make it more difficult, whether you want the top one doesn't have the T's on it, so the fruitful shoots just kind of go down. The left one doesn't have really enough bracing, so it makes it kind of difficult. And mine is on the right. And really, because I want to use it for an SVA, I'm not going to have the productivity that you would if you had a typical T-bar trellis. But you know, that I'm okay with that. Pergolas are done for mainly commercial. So if you have a lot of room, it's just like the rows of grapes. If you have a lot of room, then you want to design it for a pergola system. So pruning and training, you know, it's a lot of similarities to the spur type pruning for grapes. You have the trunk, you have the cordon, and then you have the fruitful shoots. And you're gonna have that trunk can self-support itself, and then the cordons are going to go along the galvanized wire, and the fruitful shoots again will lay across it. And you want to prune away the fruit bears on last season's growth. And so what you're going to end up doing is prune to fuzzy kiwis to about 4 or 5 buds, and you're going to prune 8 to 10 buds for the hardy kiwis. And these are heavily pruned vines, like up to 80%. So the one difference is about kiwis is you're going to prune females in December or in January when the vines are dormant, because then the sap won't be running. But in the male, you're going to prune in probably June. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want the male to bloom as many flowers as it can to provide enough pollen for it. And so this is a flower of the male right here, a kiwi male, and this is a kiwi female. And so one example, this is some of us when we've been pruning some, and it's really kind of easy to get out of control vines. This one is at that one I showed before, but after we pruned it, this is at a fellow home gardener looking up at the vines, and this is while we're pruning it. And this one has a great structure, but and you can see we took a lot of pruning out of it. So you have to kind of just keep doing that. So when you want to plant your kiwi, when you pick it up from the nursery, it might look like this. And this is not, when you plant it, this is not what you want it to look like when you get done. You're going to end up picking one of the two, one of the most robust shoots coming up, and then you're going to cut it back to 2 to 3 buds. And then during the growing season, you're going to pick and select the most vigorous of that and let that one go up. So here's an example, and I'm sorry, my the picture's a little fuzzy, but this is right when you plant it. Oops, sorry about that. This is when you plant it. Do not know why it's doing that. So this picture A is when it's while it's getting planted, 2 buds. The top, you can see what you're trying to do is get your vine, your trunk, to establish a trunk on your first year, and you're going to be trying to get that to get up to the center wire, and you're going to prune away all the other laterals. So you're just trying to put as much growth to get that up and growth to get into the roots. Then hopefully at the after the first year, the next winter, you're going to head that, which is in D. And then during that growing season of the second year, you're going to try to develop 2 cordons. And then the third year, hopefully you're developing lateral branches, and you might get a small harvest that year. So when you harvest kiwi berries, the kiwi berries, they don't harvest all at the same time. And so you're going to have to kind of go back and do that like you would, I guess, a raspberry or any other type of berry. And they're ripe when they're soft to touch, and you pretty well they don't store all that long, but they can be frozen. The fuzzy kiwi, though, you harvest that much later in the year, and the fruit is still hard. The seeds are black, though, and you can store it in the refrigerator and then pull it out and ripen it, kind of like a camise pear is what I kind of think of it as. The only real pests and diseases for this is really in this area at this point is root rot. And so what you want to do with that is make sure you have a really good draining soil or raised bed or drain tile. That's all I have for kiwis. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to line up here. Okay, for anyone am I on? Yes, okay. If anyone who's still awake, I'm going to cover some of the more exotic fruits. And these are the things where people walk through your yard and they see a strawberry or a blueberry and they're like, oh, that's nice, I know what that is. But if they walk through your yard and they see an Aronia, they're going to go, wow, what's that? So I've got the wow, what's that presentation with a little bit of time we have left. So the first thing I'm going to cover are currants and gooseberries. And you might start to see some of these things in the grocery stores now. I've actually started to notice that they sell currants in like New Season's grocery store when they're ripe. And that's the red berry up there. These are small, they're tart berries. They're really good in baked things like muffins or pancakes, or you can make a great currant jelly. They're very high in vitamin C. There are many, many different varieties of currants, red, black, pink, white ones. They're all kind of have that tart flavor. They just have different colors. The same way with gooseberries, there's white ones, red, yellow, and black varieties. All of these are pretty much self-fertile. The only caveat to that are black currants. Most black currants do require a pollinizer. But if you're trying to do a red currant, you could have just one plant. And then there's one other oddball, which is a jostaberry. It's a cross between a black currant and a gooseberry. These are all the same requirements of, say, a blueberry plant. They sort of grow about the same size as a blueberry. They sort of have the same structure of a blueberry. The only difference is if you have a really, really hot area, you want to give them a little bit of partial shade if possible for that late afternoon heat. but just good air circulation, good well-draining soil. Isn't that true for everything? And these bushes grow to about 3 to 5 feet, so they don't get huge. And there's a picture of a jostaberry. It sort of looks like a black currant, but it just has a little bit more of a milder flavor than a black currant. If you've ever been to England or spent some time in England, you'll know that black currants is a very popular jam that they use in England. They're pretty easy to take care of. They just need a little bit of fertilizer once a year, or maybe just some good compost, just a good watering during the hot summer. Prune them much like you would a blueberry when they're dormant, and just sort of clearing out some of the older canes from the inside of the plant, just so you get good air circulation. The biggest pest are birds on the red currants. I've never had a problem with birds getting into my gooseberries or my black currants, but they really, really do love those red currants. The currants ripen in midsummer. They are a little bit of a pain to harvest. The berries grow on what are called strigs. They're little tiny, they're very delicate. So basically what you do is you go out and you pick the whole strig, excuse me, and then you come in and carefully pull them off those strigs. But they can be frozen easily once you've done that. All right, I have lost my cursor. Here we go. Not too many disease issues here. You can get powdery mildew if you don't have good air circulation or good sun exposure. The one problem you can get in the red currants is the currant fruit fly, and aphids do love currant plants. So if you have an aphid problem, you can just plant a currant plant to attract the aphids and keep them off your other plants. They don't seem to bother the berries themselves, they just get on the leaves. And the only other thing is if you have a lot of white pines planted, the black currants are an alternate host for white pine blister rust. So if you really love your white pines, or you live somewhere where they're growing them for some reason, you would want to choose a black currant variety that was resistant to that. But it's a big problem more in the eastern US than here. So another one of my favorites is Aronia. And it's sometimes called a chokeberry, not to be confused with a choke cherry. A choke cherry is a huge tree, but they're these little blackberries. They are so easy to grow. They get to be a shrub about 6 feet tall. They're very astringent, so you do not want to eat these fresh. But the plus side of that is even the birds don't like them. So nobody bothers Aronia. Insects don't, there's just no insect issues with them at all. They are extremely high in vitamin C. These are very popular in Eastern European countries because they can't really easily grow oranges and things like that. So they use Aronia for their vitamin C, and they usually just mix it with other fruit juices. Like we mix it with blueberry juice, and it makes it something palatable. It is native to the Eastern North America too. Excuse me, I've got this tickle in my throat. They are very easy to grow. You want to plant them in full sun. It's easy to just put them out in your landscape. They get to be an attractive shrub with pretty white blooms, and then those big strigs of blackberries hanging off of them in the fall. Again, you prune them just like a blueberry. I don't even prune mine every year. Just every few years, I'll go in and prune out some of the older canes just to open them up again. And you can freeze those berries for use later on in the year. So you don't have to process them all at once. You can just pick them, throw them in a bag, and stick them in your freezer. Another one of my favorites is called a honeyberry. And it sort of looks like an elongated blueberry, but this is actually in the honeysuckle family. It has a kind of a sweet tart flavor, just very similar to a blueberry. There's several different varieties that you can find around here. You must have 2 of these for pollination. So that is the one key here. If you don't have 2, you will not get any honeyberries. You want to plant them in full sun. They can take a little shade late in the day. And they get to be pretty big plants. So you want to leave about 5 feet between the plants. Or just stick them out in your ornamental bed. Just leave enough space around them for air circulation. They're a very attractive plant. And people will walk by and see those funny looking blueberries and wonder what that plant is. They're much like a blueberry in that they do have shallow roots, so you want good drainage, a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer in the spring. Again, pruning them like a blueberry. There's a theme here. If you know how to prune a blueberry, you'll know how to prune a lot of the different berries I'm talking about. And they fruit on 1-year wood, just like a blueberry does. You can, if you don't have good air circulation, you can have powdery mildew. A leaf roller can be a problem, but that's pretty uncommon. So they're pretty easy to take care of. If you've ever gone hiking in the woods, you will probably see, particularly in the fall, you'll see the huckleberries. And there's many different kinds of huckleberries. There's the kind that are deep purple, there are the kinds that are lighter blue, and then there are red huckleberries. The red ones are a little more tart. I personally like those for using in baking. But these are easy to stick out into your landscape, and they can take some light shade. So this is something that's pretty versatile. Actually, the shadier the spot, the higher the bush will get. So if you put them in full sun, you're going to have a smaller plant. These, you've got to think about a forest environment. They want very moist, well-drained, acidic soil. Think about all the pine needles coming down, fir needles in the forest, and it makes the soil very acidic. And that's what the huckleberries really love, that kind of environment. They need a pollinator, so you need to put in a couple of these. But in the fall, they get that nice red color, and they're very attractive. Again, fertilize them just like you would a blueberry. So when you're fertilizing your blueberries, just throw a little bit on your huckleberries. Keep them moist, but usually weekly is good enough, particularly if they're in a little shade. And a nice layer of mulch will help keep that moisture in and suppress the weeds. And again, birds also love our huckleberries. So they're native to the Pacific Northwest, so you may have to throw a net over them when they're at their berry production time. And another one of our natives in North America is an elderberry. These get to be larger bushes, about 8 feet tall. They have also a very shallow matted root system. And there's several different kinds. There's one that's native to North America, and then there's a European variety, which is a little less hardy, but it does have larger berries. These are self-fertile, but you will get more fruit with a pollinator. And again, these can be out in your ornamental bed. I sometimes just sort of think of them as bird food. So I'm planting a bush that's pretty and it's providing food for my birds. But you've probably heard of elderberry wine, elderberry vinegar. You can make jam out of them. Some people who do their own weaving and things of that nature will use elderberries as a dye. And they have been used for medicinal purposes. Again, no disease issues. It's a pretty plant. It's got a pretty leaf structure. The only caveat here is the red ones. If you see any like the picture here, do not eat them. They're toxic to humans. Birds can eat them just fine. So leave those for the birds, but you as a human do not want to eat the red ones. The blue ones are fine. And last but not least, and you might wonder if you've ever seen a fig tree, it's like, how can we include this in the small fruit presentation? But the tree is big, or can be big, but the fruit is small. So we decided to throw in figs. And you can also heavily prune figs to keep it into more of a, even like a shrub shape. Rather than having one trunk, you can allow several trunks to come up out of the ground and keep it more like a shrub, and prune them back every year to keep it to a reasonable size. But there is something very nice about a very majestic large fig tree. So if you have the space and you don't mind a large tree, you can just go ahead and put in a fig and let it grow big. There are many, many, many different varieties of figs. My personal favorite is Desert King. I can't say I've tasted them all, but the one I grow is Desert King. It's got that red flesh. It's really tasty. Again, you can put, these want full sun. And what I love about a fig is once it's established, you don't need to water it. You don't need to fertilize it. The only thing you need to do is visit it once a year and do some pruning. And then of course, go out and pick the figs. There are no pests, no diseases, nothing to worry about, except deer do like to eat the figs off the tree. They won't bother the tree. They won't bother the leaves, but they will stand there under the tree and rear up and pull off the figs even before they're ripe. When they're hard and crunchy, they just love them. But figs have a lot of fiber, and maybe that's what they're after. I don't know. But if you have the space, a fig is one of the easiest things to grow. So just to kind of wrap up the whole presentation tonight, I hope you recognize that there are some commonalities between a lot of our small fruits. A few need some kind of infrastructure, like the grapes, the raspberries, the kiwis, but other than that, most of these things could be put almost anywhere in your yard, as long as you can provide the right growing environment and protect them from any critters that might want to get after them. And I think you're going to get all these references sent to you, but just to wrap up, there's lots of good references out there if you really want to go down these rabbit holes. And I don't know, do we have time for questions for anything?
We're pretty tight as far as questions, but I would encourage folks to send questions that you might still have to our answer clinic. I did put that email address in the chat box, not to be confused with the Q&A box. And it's mganswerclinic@clark.wa.gov. So I want to thank all of our presenters, and I want to thank all of you for attending this evening. As I mentioned, we will post a recording of this presentation on our website. So please visit that in the next couple of days for this and numerous other presentations that we've done in the last year or so. If there are other small fruit workshop topics you'd like to see us present, you can put those in the chat box now. And Stuart's going to take note of those and start getting to work on those. And before we say our goodbyes, I want to let you know about our next workshop, which happens to be tomorrow evening, starting at the same time at 6:30. And that is Letting It All Soak In, a rain garden webinar. So in addition to growing fabulous small fruits around your garden, you can also capture the rain off of your impervious surfaces and make a stunning landscape feature. And so I have also posted that link in the chat box as well. If you click on that now, it is a hot link and it will open up the registration page. So you can just keep that open as you're closing out of this event and go ahead and register as you're leaving. So looking at the Q&A, there's lots of thankses coming in and happy people. I'm not noting any questions offhand about topics that you'd like to see, but we're happy to have you send an email to me if there is a specific topic that you'd like to see that you think others would like as well. So I'll stay on for the next moment or two for folks who may want to type that in. Otherwise, thanks and have a good evening.